All right, so good morning.
Good morning.
I think all of you know me. I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't know me, so I don't really need to introduce myself, but um, I am now the new volunteer and creative coordinator. And some of you might ask why. I know I've gotten this question, why did you, I'm just going to turn my video off. It's throwing me off. I'm sorry. It's weird seeing yourself here. There, that's better. Um, so why did I apply for this role? I guess at the beginning of COVID, I started to see two things happen. One is that we saw a huge drop off for obvious reasons for the need of volunteers, but also in the burnout for the ones that were left behind that were still there to pick up the slack. And that's not anybody's fault. Obviously, that was the pandemic, but there was some that still had to come in and do things. And I guess it made me realize I saw volunteers in a totally different way. I saw them as gifts and blessings, the hands and the feet, the eyes, the ears, and the heart of the church. And so when that role was first put up, in, I guess in vestry, they started talking about it, and then they posted it, and I realized that I was kind of passionate about it. I didn't realize prior to COVID that that's something that I was passionate about. But COVID made me realize that I was. As we returned to the in-person services, there was a new need, a really big need for two things. Volunteers, obviously, we'd had a lot drop off and some didn't return to their roles, but also a deep need for connection. I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, and maybe some of you have felt it, but the disconnect with all the new faces. There's been so many people that have said to me, I come back and nobody's familiar. There's so many new faces and I don't feel connected to the church anymore. With growth, it's amazing, but it's also a difficult thing. And for obvious reasons, I think of teenagers and the changes that they go through and how it changes the family dynamics. And growth of a church is a growth in a family as well. And so those dynamics change when we have growth. And the best way, quite frankly, practically, for people to get to know each other and to connect with each other, oddly enough, is serving with each other. Sharing a passion for the ministry, working together for a common purpose, meeting together. These are all ways in which people connect with each other within the church. And so while growth has changed and the dynamics have changed, it's also opened up a lot of potential for new connections, new ministries, and a deeper connection to not just the church, but ultimately to God and the kingdom of God. Jesus was our example as he was led by service. I'm just gonna, sorry, I've got a strange throat going on today. I'm sorry. So where do we start? During COVID, at the very, very beginning of COVID, I began a relationship with somebody who was struggling. And we started praying together, walking, and we were talking through some of the suffering that they were going through. And I mentioned to Tim how life-giving it was for me. I came home and told him what a joy it was in a weird way, given that it was such a dark time for this person. It was life-giving. And Tim said, you know, there's a ministry for that, right? Much like you would say there's an app for that. So he connected me with James, and sure enough, the pastoral care team was in need of lay members. I was trained and started going about my business. But I had to think about that and wonder, like, if that's the pastor's wife, I didn't even know that there was a need for pastoral care or that there was even a way to volunteer in it. Then what about the church family? Do they know? Do they know what's going on? So our first steps, or my first steps, is much like an awareness campaign for Little T. Do you know what the ministries are? Do you know what we have here, what we offer? Other than the obvious ones, which we see each Sunday morning, we need to show people what's available. Just as a side note, I remember my very first meeting in September, our first team meeting. James was talking and he mentioned the Stevens ministers. And I honestly have to tell you, I thought that was, I didn't realize they were still active at our church. So it was a bit of a shock to find out that they were still running and active and going strong and growing. And it's exciting. And yet people don't really know what's going on, especially the new people. We don't want people just warm bodies, just doing the job because it's available. We want people that are feeling fulfilled by the work that they're doing. We want them to know what their God-given gifts are, and then ultimately to be more committed to the volunteer roles that they're taking on, more committed and enjoying their service as opposed to just doing it because it needs to be done. So that leads us into, obviously, step number 2, discernment. We're going to be running hopefully this winter. We're sourcing a few different courses, but a course that will help us to discern our gifts and what ways in which God has gifted us. And there's so many different ways. And by you, I'm using the royal you. And since I'm talking about the entire church, not just you guys as a group. So we're planning 1, awareness, let people know what's going on. 2, discernment, what are your gifts? And then hopefully once we know what those gifts are, we will then move into a placement where once somebody says, you know what, I think this is for me, we can move them into that ministry and have a more fulfilled volunteer group. And then obviously the final step is appreciation. Have you ever done a lot of work and not been recognized for it? I know that most of us have, and most of us wouldn't say so, but it does leave sometimes a little bit of a grumble in us. And we don't serve for that, for the recognition, but the truth is that the recognition is actually payment. And I heard a quote, it was by an anonymous, but it said, volunteers are unpaid, not because they are worthless, but because they are priceless. And it's absolutely true. We can't do this without you, and we value you, but it's important that our volunteers know how much they're valued. And so that will obviously be the final step, is to figure out various more creative ways to appreciate our volunteers. That is, I mean, pretty much it for the volunteers. I'm going to turn my video back on. That's the volunteer role, and I'm going to open it to questions. There we go. So if you want to unmute and ask any questions about the volunteer role, I'm happy to answer those. I can't see anybody here.
Oh, people have turned out the Laurie, Joanne. I was one. You were talking about doing some kind of questionnaire or something for discernment, and I presume you'll be. I hope you'll be kind of coordinating or collaborating with Karen once she starts, because she's going to have a mandate for discerning social justice needs in the community, and also kind of where the congregation of Little T collectively sees
I have
ourselves
yet
going
to meet
for social
Karen.
justice. So.
I haven't met Karen yet, but yes, I'm assuming that we'll be doing a lot of work together. The course that we're looking at, there's 2 that I'm trying to figure out which one is best. But it's more geared to volunteer roles. So it would be a short course on discerning for yourself what your gifts are. And I don't know yet how that will work, but that will be done in the winter time, likely via Zoom so that people can get there. But it's still in the early stages. Right now we're in the push. I don't know if you've noticed the grapevine. I've been trying to push different ministries each grapevine.
Yeah.
And then in the print, we're going to be, as soon as I get the actual desk, we're going to have a desk downstairs near our new community and arts board, where we'll have pamphlets for every single ministry, as well as a ministry guide that everybody will be able to take home, so that they can always have at hand what ministries are available, not just to volunteer in, but for interest's sake, but also for need. There's ministries that you might want to, take part in, and you might not know what they are. So, I mean, a lot of you guys, I think, are pretty well informed, I hope, I think, but especially for our newer families, it seems like it's oddly easier to get. We have all the obvious ones: greeters, sides people, lay readers, the obvious stuff that you see each Sunday, music. It's harder for us to get like small group leaders and things like that. Those ministries, it's even ministers, obviously, if people don't know, it's still active, which I think I might be one of the few that didn't, to be honest. Like I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that I didn't realize that that was still happening. And even the pastoral care, I kind of just thought it was James, and I didn't realize there was a team behind it until Tim told me there was a ministry for that. So I think just making sure people know what's what, and then figure out where they fit into that role so that they can connect to the church.
I still have to get back to you about the refugee committee.
Yes, that's okay. With the desk that I bought for that space arrived. It took a long time to find because furniture in Canada apparently is hard to get at a price that is within reason. And it arrived totally damaged in about 4 different places. So it's all being delayed a little bit, but we're trying to figure out a way to, by we, I'm saying me, to get all this up without necessarily having a desk, even if it's just a ministry guide for the moment. So yeah, as soon as you can, Joanne, that'd be great. Is there any other questions before I move on?
Oh,
No? I'm going to go ahead then. So obviously, yes, I'm a volunteer coordinator, but I'm not just about volunteers. And this is where, move on to the next slide here. The second half of my role is the creative coordinator, and this is where I will spend a little bit more time in this presentation because it's what I get the most questions about. I'm gonna turn my video off again, sorry. So what exactly is it? And is it engaging, or sorry, it's engaging artistic expression of worship, sharing the gifts and talents that God has given the artists of the community to enhance our worship and our time together, not just on Sundays, but throughout the year in fun and creative ways. And those slides. I hope you like my little squiggly arrow there. God introduces us to himself in the very first book and the very first verse as a creator. And yet Christians, really few Christians, I won't say Christians, few Christians really understand the power of creativity and its influence on culture. If God's a creator, then he's also an artist. And if we're made in his image, then we are works of art. And I think about in Ephesians where God talks about us being his workmanship, his poetry. It's in the, I believe it's the Passion version. I'm just trying to find the verse here. I'm not going to find it quickly enough. He talks about us being his poetry. Sorry, I hear somebody asking a question.
No, I think it's Ephesians 2, verse 10, where he talks about us being poems.
Yes, yes. I lost this. Or maiden is image. So we're artists as well. Because we are made in his image, he's an artist. We're also artists in all various ways. I want you to imagine going for 1 month. And I heard this said in a political statement about schooling, but I want you to, I'm going to use it here, to just think about your month. We'll pick December, and I want you to imagine it with absolutely no artistic expressions. So no music, no books, no visits to the theater, no concerts, no art museums, no podcasts, no television, no movies, no knitting, Nancy, no advertisements, although I think for the most of us that would be appealing. And think about what your life would be like without any of it. Oops. This is just a quote that I saw that I found very profound. Through his artistic creativity, man appears more than ever in the image of God, and that was Pope John Paul II. Without art, without creation, nothing is. We are created. We are masterpieces of God who threw stars into space, and our worship, our hearts, our voices, our songs, our pain, our sorrow, and our joys are all manifested through our creative expressions. What would the Bible be, for example, without the Psalms or without poetry? The most noticeable artistic expression in the church is always music. Not necessarily because of music, but there is an exclusion almost of all other art because music is so prominent. But moving along here, I'm going to give you the definition for art before I move on. The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. So it's so much more than music. Listed here, and I put it up on the side here, are only a few of the various ways people process life through creative expression. And I've listed them all, but I'm just going to say it as well. There's painting, writing, poetry, song, sculpture, photography, videography, multi-disciplines. So mixing that all up together into one piece. And it goes on and on. One thing that came up this week, and it's not in here because it literally just happened, but I don't know if you've noticed, we've been trying to get a quilt for the nursery. And I had somebody write to me this week. They've got a quilt. And interestingly enough, it's made by a group. It was a Christian group in Egypt who lived very close to a dump where a lot of very, very impoverished young women were working and living in this dump. And their job, of course, was to sort through the garbage and separate things out. And this Christian group came in and were teaching these young girls how to sew and make clothes so that they could use their skills to get themselves out of the dump. And this particular quilt that this woman had came from one of these girls. She bought it from one of these girls from this dump. And so this quilt that has come all the way from the dumps in Egypt is now going to be used in our nursery for our babies. So it's just another way that art, I mean, it's a quilt. You don't think about quilts. Well, some people don't think about sewing a quilt, art, but it is, and it's a creative expression that somebody has used to help build the kingdom. So next. And this I get to quote Tim here. Animating the creative gifts of our community in the service of our communal life and worship. And that's a quote from our very own Tim Haughton, who, side note, it's his birthday today. And it made him stop. We were having a conversation about this topic, and I made him stop so I could write this down. When creativity and God come together, there's a joy and profound movement in the spirit. And if you think about a moment in your life when you were deeply moved by God through an artistic expression, if it was a painting, a book, a song, or maybe you received a gift that was made by someone that was thinking about you or praying for you, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And again, going back to that quote, it's about animating the creative gifts of our community in the service of our communal life and worship. And we have seen that in the different videos that we've done over COVID with the Advent calendar videos, the Stations of the Cross videos. We have a wealth of talent at Little T, and the artists want to share their talent. And again, we saw that in the response to the videos. But we also have a congregation that's deeply committed to the arts and the exploration of the creativity of the artists. So can you think of a similar time when you were so moved by something that you've read or heard by someone comes along and shifts the perspective just a little bit and moves you, and that you're blessed by their work because it's something that you haven't necessarily seen? You know, I had that with a couple of those, especially last year's Stations of the Cross videos. There was a few that I'd never considered that particular verse in that particular way. They've come at it from a new perspective. This is the direction that we're talking about when we're adding creative works to Little T. Obviously, we have all been moved by all the videos that the artists have done, but also by the expressions of Mike Jansen, Ins Choi. But we also have a lot more talent at Little T. So my role is to gather all of those artists and creators and find creative ways to incorporate them into our regular worship and lives. And I'm tasked with giving them space as well to grow together, to give them time and a way to express themselves with other Christians. So there'll be things like small groups for songwriting, or retreat days where they get together. I once participated, and this going back a few years, but I once participated in an Imago project that INS was running. It was called the Ruth Project. Basically, it was a group of artists who gathered together on a Saturday. It was at a beautiful barn retreat space up near London, Waterloo area. We got together in the morning, we ate together, we got to know each other, and then we dove into the book of Ruth, and in a very intense way, studied that book together. And then they were tasked at the end, they were all given a passage from that book, and they were tasked with writing a song and creating a song for their particular passage. After a few months, we all got back together. And again, we ate together, we talked together, prayed together, but we also invited people for that evening. And the artists then all got up to perform their pieces. And as I sat, I was actually the photographer for that event. So I got to see this all from behind the lens. But I watched the book of Ruth come together in this very real and beautiful song. And it was a way of looking at Ruth in a whole new way. It was a totally different perspective, seeing it from all these artistic roots that these people were taking with it. I could see it, I could feel it, I could hear it, and I was deeply, deeply moved by it. So what are our next steps? Next steps, I think we talked about the small groups. I think we'll be having some small groups. We're going to be getting together all the artists, figure out who they are and what they do and what they want to share. We'll be having, obviously, nights where we perform things for people or show people via open mic nights or worship nights where there's all various forms of art displayed in that. But the main thing is that we create, we gather, we celebrate, we share, we hope, we dream together, we worship in the ways that God has gifted us to worship, and we refresh ourselves with the worship of those who created something for us. Because just as God shared his image with his creation, so too do we share ourselves with our own creations. And that is it. I am going to stop sharing and allow for questions and chit chat. Hang on a second. And get my video back up. There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. That was very helpful to understand. And also, I now see the connection between your creative coordinator and the volunteer coordinator. It sort of adds a new dimension or a special dimension to volunteer coordination. Yeah, just a question for me is, how do we support you in your role? You've taken on quite a big role, and also it's in some ways you're doing it together with Tim, so it's can sometimes be overwhelming. How can we as a congregation support you and also give you times of refreshment so that you yourself can step back?
That's a good question. I think obviously the biggest thing, the best thing anybody can do is praying. There's obviously Tim and I, for example, are navigating when to talk about work and when not to talk about work, and how to separate that and leave it at the office, and then have our own and keep those. It's I come home, I talk about my day, and it affects him because it's his job too. And so we're trying to figure that out. I think we're managing. It's been going well so far. There's been a couple times where we've had to say, okay, we've got to stop talking. It's 10 o'clock at night. We're not talking about work anymore. So we're learning. In terms of the congregational support, if you hear of things or people that, I don't know every single person's secret talent. Ed, I had no idea you were a painter and that you painted so beautifully. And I found that out at the last, I believe it was the pastoral, it was the pastoral care meeting. And so I had no idea. So if you guys know of people, shoot their names to me, because we want everybody to feel included in this. And Ed, you got to be, I don't know if I have one, but we've made some beautiful Christmas cards using your image. So, that's the kind of things we're wanting. We're wanting people to be more involved if they've got gifts. There's so many ways that we can use everybody's creative abilities and mix you guys together and make something really beautiful. So that would be the biggest thing, is letting me know when you hear of something, and that goes for the volunteer thing too. If you're with someone and you're like, this person would be really good at X, Y, or Z, or this person has a real gift with, I don't know, pastoral care is on my mind. So let's just say that they're really good at listening. They'd be a great pastoral care person, or whatever it is. Send me the names. That's the best way to support me, I think, is I kind of get to know people and get to know what they're doing and what their gifts are. Help with that would be never ever be unappreciated. I would always appreciate that. So